Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of the Opportunity Playbook. Today I have Rob Fleck, 30-year veteran in product management. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. So I talk to a lot of product managers, and I always like to talk to the people who have sort of seen and done it all. And I would say you definitely fall into that category. I would love to hear how you got into this space.
Well, I find it a little bit funny. I was looking for a direction in my life as I was entering college, and I called around my aunts and uncles, role models, things like that. And some of the guys who said be a lawyer, I didn't really like, so I didn't want to be a lawyer. Some of the guys, my aunt told me to go become a scientist, but she didn't have like a path of how that would be. She was actually a scientist, and she quit it. So I'm glad I didn't take that. And my uncle told me to get into engineering. He was pretty cool, so I got into engineering. I studied electrical engineering. I was at the University of Arkansas. I loved Arkansas. It didn't occur to me that studying electrical engineering and, kind of specializing in device physics would mean I'd have to go to California until my senior year of college. I'm like, wow, there's none of these jobs around me. So I went up in Southern California. I was at a semiconductor company, and I had good lab skills and was good with customers. And, the business unit manager asked me to get into what was called product planning. That's the same thing as product management at that company. I guess it was because I could talk to customers and explain to them what the chips were and get their ideas. And so I kind of just set out to get a good career and kind of followed my path. And 2 years out of school, I was in product management. In semiconductors, they find it easier to teach an electrical engineer the basics about semiconductor business than to teach a business MBA device physics. And so that's how you can get into product management quickly as an engineer if you're in semiconductors.
There's another profession that I think is adjacent, maybe not the same, but adjacent as far as the skill set goes, which is sales engineers. So they have
Right.
the technical acumen that you're talking about, but they also have perhaps there's a stereotype about engineers that they don't know how to communicate effectively with customers. They really just are best with the technical, leave them alone in the lab and then let the other person's salespeople, account managers talk to the client. But you fall in this median.
I'll tell you, a salesperson is a very unique person. A lot of people like to make fun of salespeople that there's all sorts of jokes about salespeople. They're just out there schmoozing and things like that. But a person who can get up every single day and go out there and face rejection and still be motivated, get out there, that is a very special person. I don't think that I have that skill. I can talk to people, but I don't think I'm a guy that can get up every single day and just beat down doors and keep going. So what differentiates the two is I had kind of a strategic mindset. I can see that if we start here with this one technology, I can see where it's going to be 3-4 steps out. And yeah, it's going to get really messy in the middle. We're going to have to pivot a lot of times, but that's okay. And I think that's what made me more suited for product management than sales, because certainly I'm not a salesperson.
Yeah, I think we get reduced to our stereotypes in the given professions and maybe in life in general.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that I think those things have in common, which it sounds like you're highlighting, is their ability to communicate. And that is, it's not looked at necessarily as a technical skill. People call it a soft skill. I don't think that communication really truly is a soft skill. It's very complex. And for you to talk about something, even strategically, about what does this look like down the road and, what does messy look like along the way for us to achieve that outcome that we're going to be working towards. The communication captures a lot of things outside of just being a soft skill. It's now, how do I tell them when this is not going as they would like it to go? I don't want to say as planned, but as they like it to go. How am I going to communicate that? Versus how am I going to communicate the wins? Everyone would love to talk about their wins, but it's less comfortable to tell a customer, especially if they have several $million project, that, hey, this isn't really on time, or this is happening and there's going to be a delay. And you have stakeholders with different styles of communication. I would love to talk about effective communication in the scope of achieving an outcome, but in your case, product, because when people talk about product, they talk about the roadmap, right? Well,
right.
Roads have lots of pitfalls, speed bumps, there's detours, there's accidents. How do you navigate something like that is less, well, it's viewed less as technical and more as the soft skill, if you will?
I would say Yeah, it's funny we're talking about this now because I just recently had something that made me realize I have to, go back and continue to work on my communication style. Communication style, communication in general is probably the most important thing I think anybody can work on, and it's your whole life you have to work on it because there are so many different personalities, the way they want to hear things, and then you're stuck with your own way of delivering. And maybe you don't gel with everybody every time. You can't. Not everybody gels with everybody every time. I personally have this once in a while, and it's rare because I've worked on it a lot, but it has been a theme of my life where in a situation where I'm pretty excited about something and we're discussing this way or that way to do something, not even which way is better, but we have 4 or 5 options. Let's talk about that. Maybe sometimes I can have a combative style, or maybe I can have a tone that comes off as arrogant, but I hear it come back as, hey, that's a little bit aggressive, or more often than not, I'll hear that I come off a little bit arrogant, which is weird to me because I don't believe that I am. And I've been working on it my whole life, but it's something that pops up now and then. And I had a meeting recently. And when I looked back, 2 weeks later and I thought about that engagement, I'm like, here's an example of something I can take in as a case study. I probably could have done it a lot better. Let me give you a really high level overview of what that was. We were talking about an SOP. I was asked to weigh in on a SOP. And this SOP was about what to do with a product if it's, we have a problem with it. How serious is it? That's pretty important. And I really want to make sure we get this right because you're laying out a plan for the company and everybody to follow. And I got to a point where I was like, this is poorly written. And instead of going into a coaching mode, I started, I guess, pontificating, and I opened the conversation about that one section. We talked about other things, but that one section, I'm like, I don't even know what this means, right? That is a horrible way to start talking about some work that you want to improve. And I continued with that as a quick engagement. By the end of the meeting, I realized, I probably went off path there. And I actually apologized to everyone. At the end, I said, listen, I probably had a really bad tone there, and I probably didn't deliver that message correctly. But it still bothered me 2-3 weeks later. And I think that when I went off there, everything I shared probably didn't get picked up. And it was important things about how if you're not asking the right question, really you want to know is, can we accept new shipments from the vendor? And so just ask that question. Don't ask, do we set this box? Do we check this box? Do we fill out this list? Because that's abstracted from the real information. And because I came in it the wrong way, I don't think that my message was heard. And I think, I lost credibility. So the point of me sharing that is no matter how long you've been working on it, how polished, you can get off track, and now you're fighting an uphill battle. So for me, what I do is I try to have things, little flags in my head that, will tell me, hey, now's the time to take a breath. Now's the time to try to, the thing I tell myself is try to understand before you try to be understood. And that helps me a lot. 99% of the time, I come off with a pretty good working relationship with people. But I think every time I come off with a bad one, it's because I've fallen into this kind of combative tone, or preachy tone might be a better. I kind of take an arrogant, preachy tone, like a college professor who's really, really loves to hear himself talk. And that would fuck back. So I would say, as a product manager, as anyone, communication relationships are the most important thing.
How do you go about QCing self-awareness as a leader when you have to deliver, the overall strategy? This is the plan, or I don't even, even if you were to say, hey, look, it's my decision here to tell you that this isn't going to move forward because it's not a well communicated plan, even in documentation. How do you go about QCing your communication with self-awareness to stop yourself? As you said, have these little flags that go off and go, probably could have said that better. How do you do this? And how did you get to the place where you even cared as a leader? A lot of people, they're okay just talking and saying, I said it, so you do it, and that's it. But you're talking, if we look at it, you're really talking about self-awareness.
Right. So self-awareness is the most important thing. I think there have been a few points in my life, and I can't remember every single one of them. Certainly, if I knew the answer to your question, we wouldn't be talking about how I am still working on that, right? I'd be writing a book this is how you fix it. When I was 18, I had cancer. I had stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma, and my oncologist, I went to a meeting, with an appointment with him. He said, "Hey, I talked to the leading specialist in the country, and the two of us think you should know you have about a 50 shot of living. It's systemic. It's spread through your body." Well, luckily, I was 19, where you're invincible.
Yeah.
In many ways, most importantly, mentally. And I said, "Look, I'm not going to die. You don't have to worry about that." So I lived. But during that process, for the next 5 years as I was battling that, I just for some reason, made this decision. I need to really focus the rest of my life on being one of the nicest people I can be. That's what I should. I remember my uncle told me once, you're kind of born into a family. So whatever their social status is, you're stuck with that. You had nothing to do. You're born with the way you look. So you really can't fix that, right? The only thing you can really control is how you treat people. So focus on that. And from that, I started building ways to try and focus on being a better person in a relationship every single day, and just try and get 1% better, as a lot of people say. So that's the case. And I think in your question, you said, how do you communicate a message? Well, if you know you're going to communicate, I think you can work on that. I think everybody can polish that. I knew we were going to be on this podcast, so I thought about it and thought, it's when you get into a situation where something new and exciting comes up, or there's some sort of change in the flow of things, that's where you really got to be careful. That's where I have to be careful. And that's what I'm working on now. So what I'm working on now is just recognizing that, okay, I have something to communicate and I don't like what I see and I want to change that path, rather than saying, this is what I think. Just slow down, take a breath, and then ask questions about, why is this structured this way? What are we trying to get across? Had I done that instead of saying, hey, I have no idea what this means. You're telling me how to do it, what to do, or whatever. Had I started with, oh, this looks good. I like where it's going. I'm confused on what this question's about. And then, kind of leave that as one of the things. I like what this one's doing. I think we're good here. Can you tell me more about this one question? If I was able to catch myself in that second, take a breath, then I'd be in a much better position at the end of that meeting. I wouldn't be apologizing for, going off and getting preachy.
How do you balance curiosity, the all I know is that I don't know, versus your subject matter expertise, where I know this with confidence, I know this doesn't work, I know this was communicated poorly. How do you balance those two things when you're at the helm?
I think, first of all, the mistake I make is when I say, I know this doesn't work. I know this isn't written real well. I don't know those things. I think those things. And it's supposed to be a group. I do my best work when I'm working with a group, right? If I have really bright people and I'm not on my own trying to figure something out, I can bounce ideas, and you can get a spark in people and get them going. You wind up, the amalgamation of all these people and their great ways of thinking, their great brains, gives you something more than the individuals put together. And that may have been, and I'm not saying this is the case, I'm not rewriting the history in my head to defend myself. I'm more like having a breakthrough here. It may be that I was excited that we were getting into that situation that got me excited, that then made me ignore, my own self, the rails I put up for myself. And I got a little quick, a little like, let's jump on this. Hey, I don't like the way this is written. When, I should have slowed down a little bit.
If I were to look at this from a mentorship perspective, how would you inventory the lessons, if you will, much like a product, right? It's iterative. You have the ideation, it changes over time, it improves ideally. What sort of drawers do you pull from when you are trying to learn, the post-mortem of the project, if you will, if you're looking at communication from that standpoint?
Well, let's go back to the statement. Try and understand before you try to be understood. That's where you should start. And I think when I look at the lessons learned this last time of the many millions of times I've, didn't communicate well in my life, I think that one thing that I've picked up in not only in my career, but in, reading and studying ways to communicate, is you have to give space for people to contribute. You have to give space. And I remember when I learned that was many years ago, it was almost 20 years ago. And I was working on a project that I am sure I figured out perfectly. And in the end, turns out I did have maybe 90% of the answers, but I didn't tell the team, this is the product we're going to make. I knew that I'd learned enough the hard way that if you come in with something super polished, there's people feel less inclined to contribute. And if they're less inclined to contribute, you can't learn, you can't improve, you can't get people on board. It's all yours and nobody wants anything to do with it. So I came in with a blank slate and said, this is what I want to do. Even though I knew in the back of my mind, I had an architecture, I had all the vendors, I had everything we need. And over a series of 6 weeks, we had meetings and I'd bring in vendors to say that we can do this. And I was working with great people. So not only did they pick up on the original thing that I was aiming for, but they picked up on ways to pull out better features. And we were working on a whole home audio system. And we found some really cool things by letting those guys run with it and investigating new consumer insights. And in the end, we came up with almost exactly what I had come up with, but not exactly. So it's getting back to that statement we talked about earlier. I don't know this is perfect. I don't know that this is the only way. So if you don't give people a space to contribute, you're not going to learn. You're not going to have your best communication, and you're going to come off exactly like I did in that meeting. I didn't give people a space to contribute. They, a team before the team in there had written out this, and we were all reviewing it. And then I jumped all over it and just tried to bully my way through, and that was not the right thing to do. So I think that the takeaway is slow down, find out what others want to communicate, and build off that rather than trying to build off your own ideas.
There's something, I don't have to take this literally, but there's something about allowing for communication that allows people to have their own voice, their contribution, as you said, in there. How do you balance that as a leader? I mean, you're giving a direct example of you make room for people, they have their contributions, I guide them to the outcome, I get better features, but I also get what I believe the product could or should be at the end of it with everybody's input on top of that. How do you go about creating that space for people to include their ideas, include their voice, to be heard when you have a business objective versus giving directives and telling them what their choices or their voice is in the role? Let me give more context for this. I say this because when I talk to people who are sharing with me where they want to go next in their career and maybe why they're making a move, it's oftentimes because some version of why they want to move on is I have no voice. I don't feel I can communicate. I don't feel I can give input. I don't feel like I've had anything to add to this. Or actually, I heard a young executive on a mentorship call. It was earlier this week. And he said, hey, look, I was brought in by all of these other executives. They range between 40 and 70 years of age. I was brought in as the young creative with all the brilliant new ideas. And he said, but every time I share one of these ideas, they just roll their eyes and it never gets put into place. There's no action behind it. So I see people very eager to contribute their ideas, but they're not necessarily in the rooms where they're being empowered to add to whatever the project is, the product, the outcome that they're working on. How do you balance achieving what is expected and also making room for them to contribute? You're taking yourself out of the equation as somebody who might have their own way of communicating, but how do you go about really making that space for them?
Yeah, we had some really great leadership at Belkin when I was there. I was really lucky to be at Belkin during a time where they were going from just a company that relabeled things, hey, that looks great, let me put my name on it, to a company that
I remember that.
made their own products.
Yeah.
And they had great leaders for certain. They had a great industrial design team and a great UX team. And the way it worked there, and I don't know if it's that way now, but I was lucky to be there when they truly did try to empower everybody. And it's really, a lot of these things have been solved, right? So if you're someone like me who reads a lot of books on how to do things better at work, well, I don't read them. I listen to them. It's way easier for a boring book like that, you know? So to truly have a brainstorming meeting, you have to tell everyone no idea is a bad idea and allow it to be that way. Right. So get every idea up there and then it starts gelling. You get people and they start gelling. You get a little bit of groupthink. That's for sure, certain. And you fight groupthink by having one-on-ones later. Someone might give you a different idea that they were afraid to share, or they felt like, oh, everyone was going for Joe's idea, so I didn't want to talk about mine at that point.
Yep.
But it has. So if you get that group session going to get the spark of ideas, you'll get a lot on a board that you put for, parking lot. And then if you have one-on-ones later, you'll hear from the more timid people who say, well, I wanted to do this. Well, then as a leader, you have to make that known. Whether you do that, like I want to, in an open meeting, which would probably be a bad idea if the person who shared was timid, or you just take it to your one-on-ones later. And you say, you go to the next person. Maybe the next person is, Susie. You say, hey, Susie, remember Jim back there? He had a little idea and we skipped over it. Let's you and I talk about that. What did you think of that? Right? That could be a way. But I really think that when you're running a project, when you're an executive, when you're trying to get the best out of your team, you really have to empower everyone, give them safe spaces to speak. And like I said, as I started this, most of these things have been figured out. I remember studying communications in college and I thought, wow, this is a scam. Someone got paid to make this book about how to talk. I don't get that. But here I am, 30 years later, and I'm like, those are the most important books. So I would reach out to them a lot, and I implement most of those very basic things. A great book is Crucial Communications. That is, in that book, they talk about when you start getting into a conversation, it seems like someone's getting a little combative or defensive, or you need to back up and then talk about, hey, look, this is a space where we're just adding information to a pool where we can all make a decision. It doesn't matter, who shares what, or no one's going to get judged by that. And I find I do best leading groups that way and being part of groups that way. And it also helps when you have leadership who truly shares a strategy, because it's easy to get a team gelled around a strategy. It doesn't have the specifics, but you're like, hey, I want to attack this domain. But if you have some of the worst leadership is where you're told, hey, you're in charge. You can do whatever you want. And then you come back and you say, okay, this is what I want. Well, not that. Right? You can't do that. Okay, well, I'll go back to drawing. You come back 3-4 times and you realize, look, you obviously have something you want to do. If you tell me what that is, I'm sure I can get it done for you. So I would say a good leadership team gives a strategy. We're going to that point. We're going from point A to B. Help me get from point A to B. And then you give the team some space to come up with ideas together. You give people individual chances to talk to you to help focus that. And you as a leader have to maneuver all of those thoughts, all of those ideas into the best case. I have many times as a product manager in your career, you have to go around and take information from all your customers, all your stakeholders, everything, and then come out with a product. And if you do that, it's never going to be like what each person wanted. It's different from each person. However, I start with saying, listen, I listened to you, and here were the things you added. And because we had to balance things, costs and time, we came out with this. Now, that's the same thing with leading a team, right? Hey, I listened to all of you. And here are the things that you had suggested. And we're able to implement 2 of those 5 things, or maybe just 1 of those 5 things. But we're happy that you gave that one, and maybe those other 4 will come up later. So that feedback also is important.
Yeah, it's something I didn't learn till later. I'm not in the product space. I've done QA testing, so I've worked on products before they've gone to the market, software, hardware, and I know that they can go through many iterations and that everybody has something to add to what the product should or shouldn't do. But it's really hard. You said something earlier. You can't be for everyone, or this is not always going to be for everyone. You can't please everybody. You can't make every customer happy. You explained it. You said, hey, look, because cost restraints, time restraints, resources, or whatever, we can only do X amount of the features that we ideated on, and we're going to go with those first. But when you're talking to external stakeholders, how do you, and this is sort of the nerdy business part of it, but it still is communication. How do you go about setting expectations with people? Because when it comes to it, you have this retention piece where you want them to be engaged. You still want them to be a client. You still want to give them what they want. You might even be a quarter, maybe even a month away from that new feature that they wanted. How do you go about keeping people engaged through your communication specifically? Not a promise of some feature that's going to be rolled out, but how do you keep them engaged through communications? That's what we're talking about here. That's the most powerful part of what
Right. It's important to every business, communication. How do you keep your employees engaged if they're expressing, I wish we did this and we're not? Well, to sum up, the strategy is you have to be comfortable with not being able to implement everything. And you also have to make your peers, your management team, and your customers comfortable that they didn't get it. And really, I think the most powerful way is to acknowledge what they asked. If no one wants to be ignored. So if you're just saying, hey, here's what I'm doing. Every time I just said, here's the final product, and it doesn't have all the features, I get huge pushback. They hate it. But if I say, here's the strategy, and there were 10 great ideas, and we zeroed in on the 3 we're going to work on now. Everyone who had those other great ideas, right, they feel acknowledged. And if they can't get over the fact that you can't do everything, that's a different thing. You need to, it may not only be your problem. You can't be responsible for everyone. That's certainly the case. But I would say 90% of the time, everybody is comfortable if you acknowledge, yeah, I understand you want us to do this. There's some hurdles that are preventing us from doing that, but we can do these other things. That has been my avenue to success when it comes to keeping people engaged. And, on things as simple as a product, I would say it works probably 99% of the time. Things that are more difficult, personal fulfillment in a job, that is harder, right? In that case, you can't just acknowledge it. You have to show some sort of action because actions speak louder than words. So if you can come back on those, because that's much different than making a product. You say, listen, I know you're upset with the way we make decisions here. And what I can do is this little bit here, and I'm not trying to get into specifics because I want to keep it high level, but we can offer this one way of providing feedback. Many companies, right? We have all read that many companies, if they provide a suggestion box, just the fact that the suggestion box exists makes people happier. But if then in the company meetings, who's ever in charge of taking those suggestions in, and say, we had 20 suggestions. Some were about the lunchroom, and some were about how to do, help people in their career, and a few of them are about products. And we did these 5, right? We are able to. People are excited. Right, the suggestion box works. And I just read something recently that there was a company that did that, and they made a product specifically from suggestions, and then they did a whole product line specifically from suggestions, and it was the most. And I wish I could remember that company in the book, but I can't. But yeah, we have all read that. So if you don't have, when it comes to managing people, you have to show actions, right? You cannot gaslight them, and that's the difference between managing your team and managing your products.
Yeah, it's interesting that as important as communication is, it's definitely not everything. You said something very important. You can communicate these things, but if they don't see the action following it, the action is not more communication.
Yeah.
I think if you look at corporate communication, even organizations that have a communications professional for everything that's exchanged from leadership or people, culture, and policy, you can put that out a million times. At some point, people will stop listening to the communication and they will communicate back and say, well, you've been saying this, but we don't see anything behind it. How do you give, the simple answer is action, but how do you give intentional and mindful communication, since that's what you're describing here? How do you give action and purpose and meaning in a situation where you can't please all the customers, whether they're the internal employee and what they want or the external people?
Well, David, don't you think as a person hearing no is better than not hearing anything at all? That's what.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think with my teams that I manage or manage as projects, saying no, we can't do that and giving the reason is just one step below doing it, right?
Yeah.
If you can't do it, here's the reason. It's probably a good reason, unless you're just being difficult. But if you're being difficult, you shouldn't be in management, right? So if you can't come up with a good reason why you said no, and there's a million good reasons to say no to many things, right? We don't have the personnel here. We don't have the money here. And that's the one that comes up most often for me. Just tell me that we don't have the investment. Don't gaslight me and tell me we can make the investment. I want you to go plan it. Yeah, we can spend all that money and then don't do it. I'm eventually going to find out you don't need the money. I would rather be working towards a $5,000 goal than a $50,000 goal if the $5,000 goal can be implemented. So taking my own personal view of that and the way I've communicated things like that, managing products, I think that's the better way is honesty. I know it sounds, in the end, we basically came up with honesty is the best.
Yeah, it's not to be diminished. Most people, as you said, I don't even know if they just want to hear no. They would like to hear a response.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know where to put their expectations. They don't know if it's, hey, are you busy? I remember I was just talking about this earlier today. I was talking to someone specifically about perhaps the valley of their career, as a mentor said to me. And I remember I was sitting in one of those valleys talking to my mentor. And then I said, I have no idea what to do because there is zero communication, none. I'm literally not hearing anything from the executive team who I report directly to. I have no idea what's going on. So how am I supposed to turn around and manage? I can't even provide communication. All my communication is going to be BS, essentially. And everyone's just waiting around going, okay, there's no action. I'm literally not even doing anything. The inaction, the silence, the lack of communication is worse than no. And it creates a lot of speculation, which is worse than no. It's almost worse than silence. And that's something I don't really hear a lot of people talking about. How do you combat speculation when you're not at liberty to speak freely? And by the way, I don't expect you to have the answer. I'm just curious to know because I've had to do it as a leader. I'm like, what do I say? I have nothing to say because I haven't been given a directive other than just chill, just sit there, be quiet, don't say anything, don't do anything, just enjoy this quiet time. It's fine. I'm like, you're asking me to sit here and I think there's a gas leak and I'm waiting for a match to be accidentally struck or there to be a spark that turns the silence into panic. And that's already happening. So, I mean, I'm sure everybody's experienced this at some point, especially with all the changes in the economy in the past 5 years. But I'd be curious to know, if I were looking to you as a mentor, how would I handle that situation if you were advising me as another manager managing people?
I think some of the best managers I've had and the most successful times, the times I've been most successful is when I shared the human empathy, right? I feel the same way as you do in this conversation. But if we're talking about a hypothetical, yeah, we're in a pretty bad economy right now, and we've seen tens of thousands of people laid off. I've been through 2008, where the Great Recession. I was through the dot-com recession. The last few years, we've had stagflation. All of these things are great learning experiences, and when I have a situation like that where people are saying, and you're hypothetical here, oh, I'm worried, what's going to happen? I just try to empathize and say, I know how you feel. I've been through this a few times, multiple levels, and we're doing the best we can. And right now, there's nothing to communicate, but I can tell you, it's a good company, right? We have good leadership, and the right things are going to get done. So but I feel the same way you do. The only difference is I have these three major events I was from and made it through. And I know that this is the kind of company that makes it through. So sit back. Right now, if they're really tough, if it's someone who's worried about losing their job because you don't know if that's going to happen and you can't make any promises. But that kind of advice is always good for everyone because no one does good work when they're worried. And people who are doing poor work have more to worry about, right? So get them back to doing the good job. That's what I think based on your gas leak.
Yeah, you say something, I mean, you basically just said it, but my father said to me when I think it was in college, it was like ups and downs. I had moved to the opposite side of the country. I had no support network of family or friends. I had to make all new ones, and they're not the same as the ones you've known for your entire life. So I used to talk to him a lot on the phone. And I remember he asked me one question, and he didn't say it in an empathetic tone, but he said, is this making it better? And I said, what are you talking about? He's like, worrying. Does worrying make this better? Did you feel better? Has it fixed the problem? No. Okay, so we can remove that from the list of things that you should be doing or focusing on. And I have noticed from the conversations I've been having just on this podcast, there's this quiet calm that maybe I should call attention to. People who have been through adversity or they've been through challenges in business, or you said, I've been through 3 major economic upheavals.
Yeah.
I can look around the room and go, okay, I know there's a fire. I'm going to walk out slowly, or I'm going to go to the safest place to do it. But there's a calm that I want to call out that I think only comes from adversity. And I'm going to ask you a really hard question that I've not asked anyone else, but it's been asked of me. Do you believe that you can communicate to someone how to overcome adversity without having put them through it?
I don't know. Let me tell you what I thought about. This may get there. When I thought about my perspective during each one of those three major events, the first one, I was really scared. So I've been there. The second one, I'd figured out the process. And I remember at that time, I think I was a senior product manager. And so I wasn't managing anybody, but I was managing a lot of projects. So I was in touch with a lot of people. And I was able to tell the younger peers who were really worried, I said, look, this is what I know. If the contractors are still here, you're okay because they get rid of contractors first. So all our contractors are still here. There's nothing to worry about. Come back when the contractors are gone. We'll talk about next steps. In the last few years, as we went through the shutdown from the pandemic and then the bubble from all the buying from that, and then the retraction as people had overbought and supply chain issues, I was able to tell the guys I worked with, who worked for me, it put me in a different perspective because I couldn't promise them their jobs, right? Or anything like that. And I couldn't say things as long as the contractors are here, you're okay. Because what if we kept a contractor and got rid of them, right? So it's a much different position for me. But I was able to say with confidence, I've been laid off a couple times. And every time I come out better on the far end of it. It's a struggle, but every single time I come. And that's why I'm calm now. You should be calm. You'll either make it through and you will have this new appreciation for the job you do here and how you're appreciated and the ability to manage a different situation, or you will find yourself in a new job soon. And you will almost always find that those opportunities unlocked you and you went forward. And that's been absolutely true for me. So it wasn't a bunch of nonsense. And so I think that it certainly worked with a couple of the people who worked for me in my last position, and I think it calmed them down and helped them do their best work in a really tough time.
There's this expression, and I might be quoting it wrong, but is it that iron sharpens iron or hardens iron, something to that effect? But people don't talk about, in this analogy, this metaphor, they don't talk about the forge that the ore has to go through to form it to begin with before it can sharpen somebody else or harden somebody else. And one of the reasons why I call this the Opportunity Playbook is I love learning from other people. I love gathering the things that have forged them, the lessons, all the hard stuff, all the things that initially scared them, and now they have a playbook for surviving it, getting to the point of thriving, and knowing that they can replicate the outcome of getting back to the place where they're able to move forward. They have new lessons, and they can pass that on through others through mentorship or projects, whatever the scope of their work is or their journey in their life. And it's similar to the analogy of you only see the top of the mountain and you don't see everything else. You don't see the journey it took to get there. It's like, hey, this is the final result. But you don't see all the hell that you had to walk through, the magma that the mountain was formed from.
Yeah.
What would you say?
One boss called it was a 10-year overnight success, right?
That's a great one. What would you say after all of these formative events that, not only have you gone through, but you share these with generations of people, myself included, those who will see this, what would you say have been your favorite takeaways or lessons that you've learned today that you would communicate to somebody in addition to it's going to be fine, I've been here, I know where the smoke signals are, I know what they mean. What would you say your favorite lessons? I don't want to say biggest lessons, but your favorite lessons, even if it's just one.
First of all, in order to keep yourself, always know what the company's North Star is. What is it that they're trying to do? Where are they going? And don't sway from that. Don't go off on your own path. Right? If they're trying to get into, they're a backpack company, they want to start making tents, and as you think that's a bad move, doesn't matter. That's what they want. Okay. They just focus on that and make the best tent you can. And if their goals are very vague, always remember there's one goal you can set for yourself that will forever be right at any company. And that is your number one goal is to improve shareholder value. If you can't write yourself a note at the end of every month and say, this is what I did to improve shareholder value, then you're off. Now it's easy it's easier if they say we're going to make tents and you're like, hey, I made a great tent. That's the one thing. But what did you do otherwise? That could be new product or new process or cost cutting or whatever. But if you are constantly working to improve shareholder value, that means you're trying to improve the company. And if you're trying to improve the company, you're improving your own future too. So I would say that was one of the best goals I learned. And then there are many others about how to do specific things to product management. I would say that is a universal goal that goes across all no matter where you are. And always remember, it doesn't matter what company you're at. It exists it's trying to improve shareholder value for sure, even if they don't tell you that. And the way they do it is by shipping product or providing a service. So you need to always be thinking about moving a product to a customer. Who is that customer? Providing a service to the customer. Who is that customer? And what do they want for better service? What's going to service the company better? What's going to improve shareholder value? So I always try to look at the giant picture, the overall picture. Why does this company exist and how can I help it do that? And that will always keep you on a path where you're doing the right thing.
There is a simple way that I hear people looking for this, even when they're in the company and they were in the place where they thought they should be. And in your first point, I hear, where do I find my alignment with what I'm doing right now in life? And if I don't see it, where do I find it from there? And I think a lot of people, I know for a fact, because I talk to lots of people every day, a lot of people struggle at some point, and it will always happen. This is an interesting thing. It's not once. I had a client who said something playful to me today. They said, I don't want to figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up. Now, this is an adult.
Yeah.
But everybody, as they go through these different formative years of their life and different stages, not even just career, but just in general around their career too, they get to this new version of, what do I do next? What do I align with next? What's my purpose? What is that job? And a lot of people look for purpose in their work too. So when you lose that, especially when you go through these economic changes, then people feel to a degree that they've lost their identity. And so where do they align? So I think that's always an ongoing search. Find it, you're like, great, I'm here, I'm finding success. There's something interesting about people too. When they get to success, they go, okay, what's the next one? I feel like I've gotten my stride. What else can I do? And so it brings me in the context of your point, where is that place where I add value? And it's hard for people, I think, to really see what that value is because they maybe only look at themselves from one dimension when there's so many others. And I think even though people have different opinions, myself included, about what it means to provide shareholder value, what I do also believe that it means is if you know what the value is to yourself and you can also see where it provides value to others, it's really important because it's going to take that to find the next place that you align with and the next place that you provide value to. But you have to be able to put a bow on it, communicate those things.
I fully agree. I think sometimes it's hard, especially for people who are used to achieving. I think it's hard to recognize your value because if it comes easy to you, you think it comes easy to everyone, right? And maybe you made it so. Now, you're not giving yourself credit. People who overachieve usually work extremely hard at overachieving, right?
Yeah.
There are many people who I know that it looks effortless the way they can walk into a room and command the room and empower people to do great things. But when you get to know them, you find out they're listening to podcasts about communication on the way to work. When they're around the house, they're not listening to music. They're listening to, anything, Anthony Robbins or something like that. They're constantly working on themselves. They don't give themselves credit for that. And you may not know what you know until you find that other people don't know it. Like one sure way is if you're one of the people that always is called in to fix a project, right? You should know that, hey, you've got something there. You're valuable in that way. And I get it. You don't want to be that person. I fully understand that. And you want to now communicate your value to move on. Communicating your value to move on and climb up, that's a whole nother thing you need to work on and recognize that the overachievers do that too. So, but when you start finding that I honestly thought that I had nothing to offer at one point in my career. How old was I? I was in my late 40s. So I'd been in the job for, 20 years or so. I really thought that because I had taken a weird career path, my interest was how do I make a better product? How do I make a better product? Many people, they get into a role and it's a good company and they're happy to be there, and they do that same product, that same thing for a long time. But I had this desire to learn more, to take on more responsibility, to go from different applications, but not only different applications, different types of products. So from semiconductors to consumer goods to systems to big IoT. So I kept making challenges for myself. And at the, when towards the end of that, I was like, wow, I really didn't spend any time in one industry. I don't have much to offer, right? But I noticed that when someone would be given a project that I had started, whether I moved on to a different role or whether I had moved to another company, and I said, listen, this is in great shape. It's going well. Here's all your people that you talk to. Here's where it is. It would fail. And, after a couple times I noticed it was failed because people didn't even know how to go from step A to step B. They just, what I took for granted. It turned out that 20 years of experience takes 20 years to get. And because I had moved, I had a very unique thing. So I would say to the people who are struggling to find the value in yourself, you probably have a ton of value. You're just taking it for granted that anybody can do this. Well, they can't. No one has walked in your shoes for the number of years that you've been doing it, right? I know this woman who's extremely successful in pharma. She's a project manager for bringing new drugs to the market. And she started off in a doctor's office just at the front desk. And then she moved into clinical in the back. And then she was on running trials for pharma companies as a contractor. So she moved all the way up. And she felt the same way. Well, luckily, I was able to share with her. How many people at your level started off in the clinic? Knows what goes on? How many people know what goes on when they're trying to move a patient in the room and patient out? She's like, none of them. I'm always telling them that. So your perspective here, if you look at that, your perspective is incredibly unique. So you need to lean into it. Instead of telling people, oh, I've been in at the pharma, at the sponsor level, the big drug company level for 5 years. No, you have been in the industry for 20 years. And you know what happens at the doctor's office. You know what happens as the auditor or the contract person who comes through. And you know what happens at the pharma. So look at your whole path. Take it all the way back where I was selling organic fertilizer when I was in college over the phone. I was like number one salesperson because I figured out that if I sold to an organic farmer instead of an organic gardener, is just as much effort. I just was selling it by the 55-gallon drum rather than 1 gallon. So that part of my experience, which prior to the realization that I need to look all the way back, that's part of my experience now. So I add that to, maybe it doesn't hit my resume. It may not be on my LinkedIn. When I'm pulling from my experience, I don't stop at the last industry I was in. I pull all the way back. So recognize your value by recognizing everything you did, and no one has the same perspective or walked in your shoes, and share that.
There are so many diamonds in what you just said. So many. I'm not even going to say gems, diamonds. Yeah. There's so many diamonds in there. First, let me say, I've had this conversation a few times just in the past 48 hours. So I say this because this is something that people share, but they don't necessarily see, right? It took 20 years to get 20 years of experience. And when people don't talk about these things, that doesn't mean they don't operate from these lessons, but unless they're sitting down and having an intentional conversation as we are, you will never know this. But you see it every day, the top of the mountain, how they operate and act, what they produce. And I was having a conversation, and when she sees this, she's going to laugh. I won't say who she is, but she's a thought leader of her own. She coaches people on some specific things. And she was telling me about all these amazing things that she had done, but she couldn't hear really most of them or any of them because it was the challenge or the thing where she's like, I'm here, but I want to get to here. I'm not there yet. And I'm not sure that other people will see me as like deserving to be there yet. And as she was talking, I just playfully held this up. I said the reason why. I said, in the same breath that you told me everything that you haven't achieved yet, you also listed off so many things that you also even said people would love to be in the position to have achieved everything that you've done. And because you have, you now teach them and you bring value back to them. And frankly, it's thousands of people that she helps. Thousands of people whose lives you change with the 20 years of 20 years that you have, the unique way that you think, or as one of my colleagues says, the boots on the ground perspective, and taking that to the highest level and saying, I understand this problem at its foundation, at the front lines, because I have been there myself. I know what everybody does all the way up the mountain because I have walked every single step. I didn't just land here via helicopter from my MBA. I had to sit at the front desk. I had to go to the back office. I had to talk to the patients. I had to talk to the doctors. I had to talk to the people who run the clinical trials. And now I'm here. And that's why I'm able to do that. And I think that's a conversation that I love to have. Is most people will look at the tenure of your career. And this is the same conversation I had with this woman who coaches thousands of people. You can look at the glossy version of somebody online and go, wow, they have everything together. Like they know it all. Like they've got it all figured out. Like, well, one, they earned it, the 20 years, right? But the other thing is no, they're human beings. They still go through it also. And they also don't always recognize their success because today they might be struggling or focusing on a problem that they need to solve for, but it doesn't make it less valuable. It doesn't mean that you don't bring value to others and that you are less valuable to yourself, maybe even your immediate family. It's just a thing that you see at the moment. And the perspective is so valuable. I mean, it's why I have these conversations. What they all have, everybody has that you've described that we're talking about in these different anecdotes, is they all have some type of playbook that got them to where they are. And sometimes they're currently writing like the current play, but they forgot that they have all these pages of lessons. I don't even want to say wins, but all these pages of lessons, plays that didn't work, so that they know what the next step is now. And even if you're talking about your career and product, the same thing. You know that you can go in there and go, hey, I have the vision. I'm 96% certain I know what this is going to look like, but now I can give you the space. Let's talk about it. Let's hear your voices so that you too can take those steps and arrive at the same things. In your 20 years of experience, you'll be able to look back and provide the same thing to others.
Yeah. I think I left out the most important part of that when I shared that. It was that by providing that space, the entire team got involved. And that story was not about that I was 90% right there. The story was about that the team got involved and added, right? And we got really excited, and it wound up being an incredible project. And that's what I wanted to share. And I think that's what you're saying. And, I just had a conversation today with someone, and they were asking how does one get so much experience? I said, well, quite honestly, you're around a lot of places to get experience. If you have your own can-do attitude, like, yeah, I can do that. Someone else is doing it. They learned it. I can learn it. And you have that one team attitude. Like, hey, we're one team. I'm going to jump in and help. You have so many areas to jump in and share. And when you're sharing and when you're learning and when you're jumping onto some other project, you're learning. So let me ask you this, David, because I think you pointed out some great things there, and I want you to put a bow on it. For all of those people that you talked about, they're forgetting that they have that playbook, right? When you help someone, you help a lot of people. You helped me. I remember having breakthroughs right away when talking to you. When you help someone and you get them to realize they have that whole breakthrough, what is the difference in the way that they behave the day before and the day after?
Usually the immediate response is they have a laugh. Not because I do silly things like this and hold it up. People talk about holding up a mirror by reflecting back through the conversation, maybe asking rhetorical questions, and they go, oh, or literally doing it on a piece of paper. But usually there's a laugh. And I think the laugh comes from relief. And the way that I describe it is we all, when we face a problem or challenge, and you described this several times throughout the conversation, we have a feeling about what it means to us. And the feeling oftentimes is much, much bigger than our ability to identify what the actual problem is and put a name to it so that we can begin to work on it and take a step from there. And just the lifting the veil so that you can kind of peek underneath your fear, your anxiety, or your uncertainty and see that's actually what I could do as a first step. It's the realization, it's the aha moment, but it's usually presented by an anxious but relief laugh is what I find. That's the first thing. And the next thing is, what specifically do I need to do to get there? And, in part, the reason why I do this podcast is because, like you, inviting everybody into the conversation, I look at the collective knowledge of people who have lived to answer that, because I don't have all the answers. So I try to lift the veil through the conversation. But what I will also say is, after they have the aha moment, or as you said, a breakthrough, I have that moment. Okay, now let me look at the challenge I see ahead of me. I have a little more clarity on that. Let me take a step. What are those steps? Who can I talk to give me those steps? And maybe it's me, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else. But just know this, and the thing to answer your question that I would share is, somebody out there has the answers, they have the opportunity, and they have the access that you're looking for. You just have to talk to people. I tell people all the time, get comfortable with just talking to people. Be okay with, it's going to be awkward if you're not used to it. Be okay with, you're going to get rejected, or as you said, be comfortable with no, in a different context. But you have to, like a salespeople, they are not inherently ones who are like, I'm going to go out there and tackle the world. There are people like that, but it's really your ability to be curious and learn and fumble and be wrong, be embarrassed. And I say all this stuff up front because at the end of the day, those are all things that you can overcome as a human being. They're not impossible. You can overcome those. You can overcome embarrassment. You can feel awkward. You can ask a question even when you're like, I don't know if I can talk to that person. I don't know if I should be in the same room with them. But I will tell you, I talk to people every day who are saying, I would love someone who comes with curiosity. I would love someone who is moldable, even at different levels. I had a call with the CEO right before we hopped on here. Like, you know what? I'm evaluating what I need. I need this, but I really want someone who is just open to so many more possibilities that maybe I'm not even able to articulate today, but I just want the potential there. And there's somebody out there who wants to know you, who wants to give you access, who wants to give you opportunity. And you can't look at your ability to get to those places, whatever it means for you, whether it's where do I align today? What's my next job? What's my next purpose in my life? But if you're talking to people and you see that they're next to it, or they're standing there amongst the places you want to be, as long as you can have a conversation with them, even if it's awkward or you feel uncomfortable, you don't know if you belong, you have the audacity just to communicate, you will be surprised every single time. And you have to be okay with the no's, but I will tell you that more often than not, people are more curious than they are ready to say no. Or they're more curious and maybe it's not yet, it's not today. And this is really a sales mentality. If there's one thing I could say, salespeople, they have been trained to communicate in a certain way that allows them to get to opportunity. And it's an invaluable skill set when it comes to communication if it's learned and trained by someone who's an expert in it, who allows you to be curious enough to fail and then move forward. But that's the biggest thing I would say is the communication, be okay with just doing it. Doesn't matter if it goes well or perfect. It's the practice of doing it that will get you there. But there are so many people I talk to. I'm not more special than anybody else, not by a long shot. I'm not highly credentialed. The only thing I do more than everybody else is I talk to people all the time. Not because I have a podcast. The podcast is just really like, well, I'm talking to people already. Why not the wealth of knowledge that an individual might have so that somebody else can be part of the conversation in their life and learn from others that maybe they didn't. The thing about communication is not everybody's comfortable doing it. And so I think this creates an access point so someone can maybe take one more step and get there past their aha moment, get there past their fear or apprehension, and then just start to talk. Because like anybody, once you start talking to them, they're like, oh, you're including me in the conversation? Well, yeah, I got some ideas. Or I love what you do. I mean, I'm just here to listen. Can you share that with me? And that's really what I'm here doing. I'm like, I'm just here to listen. Right. What do you know that will change a life? Maybe it's mine. Maybe it's somebody else that we won't get to meet. But I think we have our respective expertise and career, but we are all able to benefit from the lessons of communication, improving it, how it's difficult, and who it will introduce us to.
Absolutely.
Rob, it was awesome to talk to you. It's awesome to talk to you as always, but thank you so much for joining us.
I always enjoy the conversation. Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it. I can't wait to see all the other things you're going to talk about on your podcast. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Rob.